So picture this. It's early 2025. The political comeback no one, or well, some people asked for, is in full swing. And former US President Donald Trump isn't just back, he's got his tariff pen inked and ready. We're talking about a major escalation in trade tensions, folks. Using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, as his trusty justification, a series of sweeping executive orders dropped on February 1st. These weren't just little tweaks to import duties. Oh no, this was the trade equivalent of dropping a new sneaker line, except instead of hype, it generated immediate international heartburn, particularly for America's closest neighbors. The initial targets were broad, hitting imports from Canada, Mexico and China. But let's zoom in on Canada because things got spicy real fast. After a brief, almost comical 30-day delay for Canada, like a movie villain giving the hero a head start, the hammer fell on March 4th. We're talking a hefty 25% tariff. And what was on this hit list? Canadian steel, shiny aluminum, all that good lumber for your theoretical cabin, and even dairy. Yes, they went after Canada's cheese and milk, but wait, there's more. An additional 10% tariff was slapped onto Canadian energy and energy resources. This wasn't just a warning shot, this was a full-on economic barrage designed to make an impact. Now, the official reasons given for this tariff tantrum were, shall we say, classic Trump. The administration claimed it was all about protecting hard-working US manufacturers from unfair competition. They also threw in a line about tackling alleged fentanyl trafficking from the north. But here's the kicker. Reports were already showing that fentanyl seizures at the U.S. Canada border had actually dropped significantly. And even more telling, US fatal overdoses had seen a near 24% decrease since 2023. So the justification felt a little flimsy, like a reality TV show plotline that doesn't quite hold up under scrutiny. Canada's then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't mince words. He publicly condemned the tariffs, calling them a direct assault on Canada's economic sovereignty. You could almost hear the polite Canadian fury simmering. It's important to remember that these March tariffs weren't the first salvo. Trump had signed executive orders on February 1st, imposing tariffs on Canadian, Mexican and Chinese imports. Canada had even announced a massive CA $155 billion retaliatory package. But then, a temporary pause button was hit, supposedly after Canada agreed to a border security plan. Clearly, that pause didn't last, and the tariff war was officially on. All right, so the US throws down the tariff gauntlet. What does Canada do? Well, one province in particular decided to play hardball. Enter Ontario, led by Premier Doug Ford. Now, Doug Ford isn't exactly known for subtle moves, and true to form, Ontario's response was a bold, headline-grabbing slapback. They announced a 25% surcharge on all electricity exports heading south to the United States. That's right, if American states wanted that sweet, sweet Ontario-generated power, they were going to have to pay a premium. This wasn't just a bureaucratic adjustment, this was a clear message. The financial mechanics of this move were pretty straightforward. Projections showed this electricity surcharge could rake in anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 daily for Ontario's coffers. Think about that, that's a nice little chunk of change. The stated plan? To use this newfound revenue to lower electricity costs for the good people of Ontario. Essentially, they were shifting the financial burden of the US tariffs, or at least a part of it, onto American consumers who relied on their power. It was a thanks, but no thanks, and also you owe us money kind of vibe. This wasn't just about balancing the books for Ontario, though. It was about making the US the consequences of its trade policies. The surcharge was anticipated to directly inflate monthly utility bills by approximately $100 in several US states. We're talking about places like Minnesota, Michigan and New York states that have significant energy ties with their northern neighbor. Suddenly, those cross-border electrons came with a political price tag, and American households were going to see it itemized on their bills. This was a direct hit to the American consumer's wallet. And Premier Ford wasn't bluffing. He made it crystal clear that this 25% surcharge wasn't necessarily the final figure. He publicly indicated that if the US decided to escalate the trade war with even more tariffs, Ontario was prepared to crank up that surcharge even higher. This transformed the electricity export from a simple commodity into a tool of economic leverage. It's worth noting that other Canadian provinces had also announced their own smaller-scale retaliations to the initial February US tariffs, like pulling US booze from government-run liquor stores and hiking tolls for US commercial vehicles. Ontario just took it to a whole new level. Just as this trade drama was reaching a fever pitch, Canada saw a major political shake-up. Bye-bye, Justin Trudeau. Hello, Prime Minister Mark Carney. Now, for those of you who don't follow the thrilling world of central banking, Mark Carney is a big deal. He's the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. This isn't just some politician who knows how to give a good speech. This is a guy who understands global finance down to the decimal points. His arrival on the scene signaled that Canada's approach to this trade war might be about to get a lot more strategic. Carney wasted no time in setting a firm tone. He announced that Canada's retaliatory tariffs, including Ontario's controversial electricity surcharge, would remain firmly in place, and they wouldn't be lifted until the United States committed to what he termed free and fair trade. This wasn't just about getting the tariffs removed, it was about resetting the entire trade relationship on terms Canada found acceptable. It was a clear message that Canada wasn't going to be pushed around and was prepared to use its economic leverage to make its point. The era of polite disagreement seemed to be over. Beyond just holding the line on existing retaliations, Carney unveiled a broader economic strategy for Canada. This wasn't just about defense, it was about offense too. His plan focused heavily on strengthening Canada's own energy sector, which, as we'll see, is a massive bargaining chip. He also talked about diversifying Canada's international trade partnerships, with a particular emphasis on building stronger ties with Asia and Europe. The subtext was clear: reduce Canada's economic reliance on the US market. Investments in crucial infrastructure like pipelines and an expansion of renewable energy were also key pillars of his agenda. Naturally, such a bold shift in economic policy didn't go unchallenged within Canada. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, never one to miss an opportunity to critique, quickly raised concerns. Poilievre warned that Carney's aggressive stance and ambitious economic plans could lead to financial instability for the country. This internal political debate added another layer of complexity to an already tense situation. So not only was Carney navigating a trade war with the US, but he also had to manage skepticism and opposition on the home front. It was a high-stakes game from day one. Back in the good old US of A, Ontario's electricity surcharge landed with the subtlety of a rogue hockey puck to the face. The reactions were immediate, and they were not happy. US utility companies, the ones actually buying that now more expensive Canadian power, were the first to sound the alarm bells. They warned of inevitably increased electricity costs for their customers, but it wasn't just about the price. They also flagged concerns about potential grid instability. When you mess with major power supply lines, things can get complicated and flickery pretty quickly. The impact was particularly acute in states heavily reliant on Canadian energy imports. Officials in Michigan, for example, voiced serious concerns. They were staring down the barrel of higher energy costs for their residents and businesses, coupled with the unsettling prospect of a less stable energy supply. Imagine trying to run a factory or heat your home when the power supply and its price is caught in a political tug-of-war. It's not a recipe for economic confidence. These weren't abstract economic theories, these were real-world consequences knocking on the doors of American citizens. Over in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul didn't just sit idly by. She announced an official investigation into the surcharge's impact on her state. Both Governor Hochul and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz took the opportunity to publicly criticize former President Trump's tariff policies. They argued that these aggressive trade tactics were the root cause of the economic instability and the rising costs their constituents were now facing. It was a clear attempt to deflect blame for the rising power bills away from local issues and pin it squarely on federal trade policy. The political blame game was in full swing. And what was the reaction from the White House under this speculative Trump administration? Reports indicated that President Trump himself described Ontario's surcharge as a hostile act. That's strong language, even in the often hyperbolic world of international relations. He also reportedly threatened to impose additional tariffs on Canadian goods in response. So instead of de-escalation, the rhetoric was pointing towards an even bigger trade fight. It seemed like each retaliatory measure was just adding fuel to an already raging fire, pushing the two countries further down a path of economic conflict. Section 5. Canada's next move's more than just maple syrup on the line. So, Ontario's electricity surcharge got everyone's attention. But the question on many minds is that all Canada has up its sleeve? The answer, it seemed, was a resounding nope. Whispers and not-so-subtle hints began to emerge from north of the border, suggesting that Canada was considering broader retaliatory actions. The message was clear. If the US wanted to play rough, Canada was prepared to match that energy, and then some. This wasn't just about electricity anymore. The entire trade relationship was potentially on the chopping block. Ontario, having already fired a significant shot with the power surcharge, started floating other ideas. There was talk of potential future tariffs targeting iconic American exports. Think about your favorite American beer, that go-to brand of ketchup, or even parts for the cars rolling off US assembly lines. These are products that US businesses export in large quantities to Canada, and tariffs on them would hit American producers hard while also impacting Canadian consumers. The selection of these items would likely be strategic, designed to maximize political pressure in key US states. It's crucial to remember the backdrop here. In response to Trump's initial February tariffs, Canada, under Trudeau at the time, had already announced a staggering $155 billion Canadian retaliatory tariff package. While its implementation was paused, the list of targeted US goods was extensive. This demonstrated that Canada had already done its homework and had a comprehensive playbook ready to go. The legal framework for such actions, the United States Surtax Order 2025, made under Canada's customs tariff, was in place. So these weren't just idle threats. The mechanisms were there. The psychological impact of these ongoing threats shouldn't be underestimated. For US businesses that relied on the Canadian market, and for Canadian businesses reliant on US inputs, a cloud of uncertainty descended. How do you plan for the future when new tariffs could drop at any moment? The Canadian government, now under Carney's more assertive leadership, was signalling that it possessed a deep arsenal of retaliatory tools. The electricity surcharge was just the opening act. The main event could be far more disruptive if cooler heads didn't prevail. Section 6, the big squeeze, Canada's billion-dollar energy ace. Beyond tariffs on bourbon and car parts, Canada held an even more powerful card: its vast energy resources, specifically oil and natural gas. This wasn't just a line item in trade statistics. This was a fundamental pillar of North American energy security. The most significant and potentially most damaging threat Canada could wield involved reducing or even cutting its energy exports to the United States. We're talking about the crude oil that feeds US refineries and the natural gas that heats American homes and powers its industries. This was the ultimate leverage. To understand the scale of this, consider this. Canada exports approximately 4 million barrels of oil per day to the United States. 4 million barrels every single day. That is a colossal amount of energy. The US is, by far, Canada's largest customer for oil. If that supply were to be significantly curtailed, or worse, cut off, the US would face an enormous challenge in trying to replace it quickly. Finding alternative sources for that much oil on the global market would be a logistical and economic nightmare, especially on short notice. Let's speculate on the financial impact of this ultimate energy retaliation. If Canada were to halt those 4 million barrels a day, and let's say oil is priced at a conservative $75 a barrel, that's $300 million in lost export revenue for Canada per day. Annually, that's a staggering $109.5 billion. This, folks, is where the Canada's $110 billion energy retaliation title likely finds its most potent meaning. The threat of withholding this much energy, with its massive economic value, represented Canada's most powerful, albeit riskiest, retaliatory option. The consequences for the US economy would be immediate and severe soaring gasoline prices, disruptions to industries reliant on petroleum products, and serious energy security anxieties. Prime Minister Mark Carney's stated focus on strengthening Canada's energy sector and investing in infrastructure like pipelines suddenly looked even more strategically significant in this context. Was he simply aiming for domestic energy security and economic growth? Or was he also preparing Canada to more assertively use its energy resources as a tool in international diplomacy and trade disputes? The mere existence of this massive energy leverage and the quiet signalling that Canada might be willing to use it was a powerful bargaining chip in any negotiation with the US. It was the economic equivalent of a hidden ace. Section 7. Cross-border chaos when good neighbours build bad fences. The escalating tit-for-tat tariffs and retaliatory measures were having a profoundly corrosive effect on the overall Canada-US trade relationship. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the successor to NAFTA, was supposed to usher in an era of stable and predictable trade. Instead, it found itself under immense strain, its dispute resolution mechanisms likely overwhelmed, and its spirit of cooperation rapidly eroding. The trust that underpins any successful trade partnership was being chipped away with every new tariff and counter-tariff. It was less stronger together and more every nation for itself. Businesses, both large and small, found themselves caught squarely in the crossfire. Supply chains that had been meticulously built over decades to take advantage of North American integration were suddenly disrupted. A component manufactured in Ontario, shipped to Ohio for assembly, and then sold back into the Canadian market might now face multiple tariffs at different stages. The cost of doing business in North America was skyrocketing, not because of market forces, but because of political decisions. Investment decisions were put on hold, expansion plans were shelved, and a general sense of economic anxiety permeated the business community. The deeply integrated North American economy, particularly in sectors like automotive manufacturing, agriculture and energy, began to show signs of fracturing. These industries rely on the seamless, low-cost movement of goods, capital, and sometimes even labor across the 49th parallel. When that seamlessness is replaced by barriers and uncertainty, the entire model starts to break down. This wasn't just a minor trade spat, it was a forced decoupling, a regional version of deglobalization with potentially devastating consequences for efficiency, competitiveness and ultimately jobs on both sides of the border. Even if these punitive tariffs and retaliatory surcharges were eventually rolled back, the long-term damage to Canada-US relations could be substantial. Economic wounds can heal, but the memory of being targeted by a close ally, the erosion of trust, and the bitterness engendered by hostile trade actions can linger for years, if not generations. This fictional trade war of early 2025 threatened to reshape North American trade patterns permanently, prompting businesses and governments to reconsider their dependencies and seek out more reliable or at least less volatile partnerships. Section 8, Global Glitch North American Drama, goes international. Now, you might think this Canada-US trade telenovela was just a regional affair. But in our interconnected world, when two major economies start throwing punches, the ripples travel far beyond their shared border. Other countries from Europe to Asia were undoubtedly watching this North American drama unfold with keen interest and probably a fair bit of nervousness. What precedents were being set when close allies and deeply integrated trading partners resorted to such aggressive tactics? Could their own trade relationships be next? The disruption to North American trade had inevitable knock-on effects for global supply chains. If Canadian resources weren't flowing smoothly to US factories, or if US goods were being priced out of the Canadian market, it would impact the global availability and pricing of countless products. International companies with operations in North America faced new complexities and costs. Moreover, other nations might find themselves pressured to choose sides, or at the very least, start re-evaluating their own supply chain vulnerabilities and seeking to diversify their sources and markets away from an unstable North America. The role and effectiveness of international bodies like the World Trade Organization also came under scrutiny. In a scenario where major players like the U.S. and Canada were openly flouting established trade norms and imposing unilateral tariffs, was the WTO becoming a toothless tiger? If it couldn't effectively mediate or resolve disputes between such close partners, what hope was there for its ability to manage broader global trade tensions? This kind of behavior erodes faith in the multilateral institutions designed to prevent exactly these kinds of trade wars. It's also worth noting that these events didn't happen in a vacuum. Concurrently, China was also retaliating against increased US tariffs, painting a larger picture of escalating global trade friction. This period of heightened tension could also spur the formation of new economic alliances or the strengthening of existing ones that exclude the more protectionist players. Prime Minister Carney's strategy explicitly included diversifying Canada's trade partnerships, looking towards Asia and Europe. If the US was seen as an unreliable or hostile trading partner, other countries might accelerate their own efforts to build trade blocs that bypass North America, or at least reduce their dependence on it. This could lead to a significant reordering of global economic power and influence, shifting trade flows and investment patterns for decades to come. Section 9. The $110 billion question anatomy of a fictional trade war. It's crucial to underscore as we stand here on May 24th, 2025, analysing these turbulent fictional events of early this year, that the specific scenario involving Mark Carney ascending to prime ministership amidst this crisis and Ontario's precise electricity surcharge strategy was indeed a speculative construction. The dramatic $110 billion figure that hangs over this narrative refers to the immense potential annual value of Canadian oil exports to the US, a lever of retaliation so potent it could redefine the economic relationship. This figure symbolizes the high stakes in this imagined energy standoff, the ultimate financial weapon in Canada's arsenal. However, while the characters and some plot points might be from a what-if screenplay, the underlying tensions are very real. Trade disputes between Canada and the US are not new. Just think of perennial arguments over softwood lumber or dairy. The potential for protectionist policies to ignite wider conflicts always simmers beneath the surface of even the closest international relationships. This fictional escalation serves as a stark reminder of how quickly disagreements can spiral out of control when diplomacy fails and economic nationalism takes the helm. It shows how interconnected actions and reactions can build into a destructive cycle. So that $110 billion figure we've been talking about, in this fictional narrative, it represents the potential annual impact of Canada deciding to turn off the oil taps to the US, a truly monumental act of economic retaliation. It's the sum of Canada's most significant piece of energy leverage, the kind of move that would send shockwaves through the US economy, impacting everything from gas prices to industrial production. While Ontario's electricity surcharge was a significant poke, the threat related to oil and gas exports was the looming economic bazooka capable of inflicting widespread financial pain. Ultimately, this speculative journey into a full-blown Canada-US trade war, centered around energy and massive retaliatory sums, serves as a cautionary tale. The line between a plausible worst-case scenario and actual political reality can sometimes be uncomfortably thin. It highlights the critical importance of maintaining stable, predictable, and mutually respectful trade relationships, especially between such deeply intertwined neighbors. The prosperity and security of both nations depend on cooperation, not conflict. This $110 billion energy retaliation, though fictional, paints a vivid picture of the perilous road not taken, a road we should all hope remains firmly in the realm of imagination.